Hopefully we're on. Hi all, welcome to the college research. No?
Still writing down.
Sorry?
Yeah, now you can.
No, you can. Okay, great. Okay, hi, welcome to the college research seminar on this Friday lunchtime. I'm Steve Corbett, I'm the Knowledge Exchange Manager for the college. This would usually be introduced by Frances Pearson, who's got the poor excuse that she got married yesterday. She's unable to be with us today. This is going to be about engaging stakeholders early in your research. We've got two really good speakers, Lauren Smith and Lauren Hall, who've actually done this practically with some of their research bits and some of the work they do. They're going to do a presentation, and after that, please put some questions in the chat. That'd be really useful, and then we'll ask those questions to Lauren and Lauren. So, Lauren, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, just for context, just to explain that we have got some people in the room as well as people that are joining us online. So thank you very much to everybody that is joining us today. I'm just going to step sideways so that Lauren can come into shot so that you can see who she is. Okay, that's very seamless. So welcome to today's session on engaging stakeholders early in research. Just briefly, we'll give some more detailed introduction and context in a second, but just briefly to outline what we're going to be talking through today. We will go through that context, and we've each got an example of where we've both engaged with stakeholders early on in the process, just to talk through and to give a little bit more information to start us off. We'll then be looking a little bit more about what is early stakeholder engagement and what that looks like. We've got a bit of an interactive exercise as best we can with the sort of blended approach, looking at the benefits and challenges of engaging early with stakeholders. And then we'll look at some effective ways of working and some practical tips. So just to kick us off, we're just going to each talk through a brief example. So I'm just going to let Lauren come in and discuss her example first.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm still not sure where to look, so I will probably combine. So my name's Lauren and I'm a lecturer in criminology, and I wanted to use an example which was a little bit more unusual to talk about today. And it's going to have to be a little bit self-deprecating in the first instance, I'm afraid, because it stemmed from listening to Lincoln City Radio. So I don't know if we've got any Lincoln City Radio fans in the room, but I love it as a station. It's a really local station, and I'd recommend engaging with it because the opportunities that can come from listening to Lincoln City Radio are numerous, and so this is exactly how I began engaging with a local organisation, which has since become nationalised actually, called Care After Combat. So I had the radio on in my office whilst I was working, and there was a member of Care After Combat giving a talk on Lincoln City Radio about what Care After Combat do. And for anybody who isn't aware, they're a charity who support veterans right from their engagement with the criminal justice system through 12 months post-release. So my research area has always been quite broad, but I focus on supporting relationships to help people move away from offending trajectories and also to encourage the likelihood of recovery from addiction as well. And so Care After Combat, we're talking about the support that they provide to veterans in prison. And the level of support that they provided really sort of stood out to me. So this provision of support right up until 12 months post-release by other veteran mentors who voluntarily provide their time to support veterans during that process. So I reached out to Peter. He gave his email address over the radio and sort of welcomed any sort of contact. And so I did exactly that. I sent him an email. I just sort of introduced myself and said, it sounds like you're doing some fantastic work. I'd love to speak to you in a little bit more depth about it. And he got back in touch and luckily was really friendly and yeah, approachable. And he said, why don't we have a Teams chat? This was during the pandemic. And you know, just see where our different areas may well support each other. And so we did. We had a coffee over Teams. We spoke about the different work that we do, and Peter was really encouraging about how there may well be a lot of crossover between what we were both doing. So I then arranged, Peter put me in touch with the clinical lead, Dr. Jane Jones of Care After Combat, and we arranged an in-person meeting. very luckily, they'd just moved head offices to be in Newark, so it was very geographically fortuitous that they had just moved. So I hopped in the car and went to see them. And the initial conversation wasn't quite as I expected. It felt a little bit more like an interview, which I hadn't maybe anticipated, and we'll talk a little bit about the benefits and the challenges of engaging stakeholders early in a couple of slides' time. But we shared essentially what we do and what we could offer each other. And James spoke about some data that they've been collecting at Care After Combat during the pandemic, which concerned some of their alternative provisions that they had to adapt to be able to provide remote support. And I said, oh, it sounds fantastic. I'd love to have a look through that data for you, see if we could sort of analyse it and look at what the key themes are which emerge within that data. And she said, that sounds fantastic. We don't have very much money available at the minute. You know, what sort of cost would this be looking like? And I said, well, given that this is something that could potentially be a long-lasting working relationship for us, perhaps we could scale the amount of work according to the money that you have available and see if you're happy with what we do and vice versa. So that began the start of the working relationship, which is ongoing today. And it's actually grown as well. So we did the initial sort of evaluative contract research for about £1,000 and produced a short report for them, which they were really happy with. And Jane has since gone to the CEO of Care After Combat to discuss larger research opportunities, which we may collectively bid for together, which is really exciting. So I've probably spoken for far too long there. I'll pass back over to other Lauren to speak about your example.
I'm not sure if it's easier or harder having two Lauren facilitating the same session. I don't really know. So yeah, thanks Lauren. So my example is in relation to an organisation called Development Plus. So some of you may have heard of Development Plus previously. They're a small charity organisation based in Lincoln, and they run a number of services to support people who are vulnerable because of a variety of different reasons. So one of their core projects that they deliver is something called Project Compass. I'm still working out where to look as well. So one of the projects is Project Compass. And I first came across Project Compass when I was out doing some research during COVID. And I was looking at the impact of COVID on the delivery of services to people that were experiencing homelessness. And obviously it was quite difficult to try and recruit people to be able to take part in that because of COVID. And because people generally were, agencies were working from home rather than working from their offices. And actually at that time, a lot of the people who were experiencing homelessness had been put into temporary accommodation, but that didn't mean that the needs went away. So Project Compass staff offered to support with that piece of research, and I based myself for some of the data collection period at their venue. So currently they deliver out of Lincoln Baptist Church, and I went and did that early piece of research with them and obviously developed that relationship with them, even though at that time that research wasn't specifically about that project. And we had conversations of, just saying what the university can offer and what our expertise was, and the conversation was just sort of left of, if you ever need any support with anything in the future, please get in contact. Didn't really know if anything was going to come of that, but in June this year, I was contacted by Lindsay Collinson, who's the CEO of Development Plus, who said that because Project Compass had been running for a couple of years, they now wanted to get some additional evidence base to inform their future delivery and to inform future funding bids, and could we help? So I went along and met with the Project Compass team, and basically we sort of collaboratively developed a research proposal during that session, and I went away, tweaked it and finalised it, and then sent it back to them, tweaked it a little bit more, and eventually we got to the point where we'd agreed this research proposal. Similarly to Care After Combat, Development Plus didn't have any funding to be able to offer at this stage, but because we'd engaged with them early, we were able to explore the opportunities offered through the productivity programme. And we actually put in an application to get productivity vouchers, which is for anybody who's not aware, we haven't got the time to sort of go into huge amounts of detail today, but it's £5,000 to pay for 20 days of academic time. And so Lindsay from Development Plus led on that application. She was supported by the research and enterprise team at the university, and we were successful. So we'd put a team in place by this point, so it wasn't just myself, it was my colleague Amanda in psychology, and it was also a couple of colleagues, Jim and Tom from Health and Social Care, who also supported the research. So essentially over the course of the summer, what we did is to conduct a review of Project Compass, and initially they just sort of asked us for a report to build that evidence base, but what we actually provided really was a bit of a toolkit to them. So we provided infographics about the outcomes that they achieved, about some of the pathways that people went through. We developed some case studies based on people that we'd spoken to in collaboration with the staff as well. So that project has just finished, but already they're using it to approach potential funders to say, this is the project, this is what it does, this is what it needs and where it needs to go in the future. So that's my example that I'll sort of draw upon today. And we've both got a number of examples in which we're always happy to sort of talk about and share those experiences at any point, if anybody wants to. So I'm just going to briefly, oh no, I'm not, I forgot about this bit. So I just popped this in. This is some feedback from Development Plus. I'm not sure if everyone at home can quite see the top of it, but I'll go through what it says. And I haven't put this up there to be self-indulgent in any way. It's just because Lindsay raises some really important points about engaging stakeholders early. So she talks about how the need had arrived, and she talks about how, because of those earlier discussions that we'd had, she knew a bit about myself and about colleagues that I work with. And so, as she says, we were the first people that she thought of in trying to address this need. She wanted to develop some knowledge around key outcomes, which is what we delivered on. And critically, she talks about this ongoing relationship. So similarly to Care After Combat, because we've developed this programme of research in collaboration with Development Plus, they're really keen to continue that relationship. And so although it was a small pot of funding initially through the productivity programme, we're hoping to work collaboratively on future funding opportunities as well. So we are now just going to talk about what early stakeholder engagement is.
So obviously our examples speak more broadly about sort of charitable organisations, I suppose, but for the purpose of the talk today, we're regarding stakeholders as anyone who may have a sort of vested interest in the research that you're thinking about. So for example, schools, voluntary sector support providers, businesses, prisons, or even other academic institutions if your work is perhaps more theoretical in sort of aim. We think it's really important to begin discussing research ideas at the initial development stage, and hopefully our examples sort of illuminate the reasons why that's important. We're going to examine that in a little bit more detail and unfortunately ask you to contribute some ideas as well about why that is important. But what it looks like in practice can vary. Broadly, we would say that asking the stakeholders what they need can be a really good opening conversation, and being clear about what you can offer in terms of skills as well. What can be then used to address specific research needs that organisations identify, but from developing that relationship, future opportunities can grow, which has happened in both our examples as well. When we're talking about sort of early engagement, we are really referring to co-production and ensuring that that co-production is evident at each stage. And I'm trying not to give away too many of the benefits and challenges before we ask you to contribute exactly that. But in terms of design, recruitment, materials, ethics and reporting, there are a number of benefits to including stakeholders very early on in sort of research design, which I think we should maybe ask to do now.
Yeah, definitely. So what we thought would be helpful is just to get everybody, so people in the room, feel free to discuss this amongst yourselves. For people that have joined us online, if you've got a YouTube account, you should be able to access the chat and pop your comments in there. So we just wanted to ask everybody just to consider, just for 2 or 3 minutes probably, What might be the benefits? We've hinted at some of those already, but what are the benefits of engaging stakeholders early? And also to consider some of the challenges around engaging stakeholders early. And if you can, are there solutions that you can think of around to work around those challenges as well? So we'll just go at that for sort of 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll get some feedback from in the room and from the chat as well, which is being monitored. So I don't know if you guys want to go through the room. Has anybody commented we can't see the slides fully? Still not.
No.
We can send them out afterwards anyway.
Let's come across again.
So just as a reminder for anybody that's joined us online, if you can access the chat through your YouTube account, then feel free to pop some comments in there about the benefits and challenges that you think there might be.
So if you can't, you're more than welcome to post it on the event team if they haven't got a account.
Yeah, so we just had a suggestion from Blaine, that's really helpful, thank you. If you don't have a YouTube account and therefore can't access the chat, the other place that you could put comments and Blaine will monitor them is on the CoSS teams. So where this event was advertised, feel free to put some comments under there and we'll pick those up as well. All right, so we'll just get some quick feedback on that. And we have come up with a list of our own benefits and challenges as well to reflect that. But just get some feedback from people first of all. Can I come to yourselves at the back of the room first? Have you got any thoughts around the potential benefits of engaging stakeholders early? Is there anything specific? Do you want to give us an example?
Establishes a good working relationship with the stakeholders from the beginning, which allows them for the public to develop with the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So for the benefit of people at home, so the feedback was it allows that relationship to be built and to develop over time so that people can work together on whatever the project is. Absolutely. Thank you. Any other benefits that you specifically wanted to talk about?
Well, I just say that it helps you formulate your research question in a more effective way. So it's like rather than kind of coming in with some random thing from the literature, instead you kind of figure out like what's actually a challenge in the field that you're interested in. What would be useful to us, as opposed to trying to then sell your research later on as something that might be useful to them you actually know it's going to be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, both really good points. So yeah, so what we were discussing in the room is that it means that it can help you to develop your research question, and rather than having to try and sell that research question to stakeholders later down the line, you're working with them collaboratively to find out what the needs are and what questions will be useful to answer. Does that summarise okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Steve?
Just following on from that, and then your research is allowed to have a greater chance of impact.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, which I hope over time the 2 examples that we've talked about will have impact as a result of that. Were there any benefits that are coming through online?
Yes, so we've got a comment to say that pragmatically funders are increasingly looking to see early engagement of stakeholders and why your research matters to them. And also to say that being able to test a working relationship with a small project is also really good before embarking on a larger research project. And someone else has also put that it's actually doing something useful for the stakeholder. Finally, you can also start to build a pathway to impact from the start, which is kind of like what you said, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah, so those pathways to impact from the start are really, really critical. Is that from the Teams chat as well as from the YouTube chat?
But that's just from the YouTube chat. We've not had anything
Okay.
as yet in the
No
Teams
worries.
chat.
But that's great. Thank you, everyone, for popping some feedback about the benefits. So, just moving on very quickly to talk about the challenges. So I'll start in the room again. Was there any thoughts that you had around specific challenges, if you want to give us an example? Yeah.
Well, I guess I'd say that normally at the early stage, research is quite speculative. You're not quite sure, how far it's going to go, and then, is it going to fit with the rest of your schedule at some point. So you can feel a little bit like you're sort of presenting something, like marketing something before you've got some solid content to kind of show for it. So you can develop a little bit of anxiety. You're not quite sure which meetings are going to develop into something fully fledged. So yeah, it's about time allocation, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors that you've talked about there. Time allocation is really important, and sometimes this can be time consuming, but usually in the long run it can save time. Obviously it depends on the specific project. And yeah, research being quite sort of speculative, it is a more challenging factor to overcome. However, we'll talk in a bit about the importance of transparency and being really open and managing expectations with the people that we're working with as well. So thank you for that, it's really helpful. Is there anything coming through from the chat about the challenges?
Not the challenges yet, but if anything pops up,
Perfect.
I was going to say, just in terms of what your view of stakeholders is, in terms of engaging them can be a challenge. So either it's the organisation that's working with homeless people, or it's the homeless people themselves that can be a challenge to get on the table.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of multiple layers to it. There's the engagement with the organisation, but then there's also from that, hopefully, the engagement with people who are accessing services from that particular organisation as well.
we've had a couple of comments come through. So similar to what's already been said about challenges of actually moving from talk and meetings to action, so taking actual research from it. And someone else has put that it might be a bit harder to be critical if you've already built a rapport with the stakeholder, or equally that it could be easier because they could be more welcome to constructive criticism from an organisation that they trust. So a bit of both there. And it can be a challenge when you start talking about funding and budgets and what their expectations are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're probably reflective of the challenges that we've got up actually. So we'll just whiz through what we've got.
Yeah. So top of the list, which hopefully you can see, in terms of benefits is impact. So as we spoke about in the room, developing that relationship and understanding it from the outset gives you a really good oversight of what impact may be right from the start. And it also gives you involvement and in terms of seeing that change occur, which is really exciting. And I think developing that relationship from the start keeps impact at the forefront of the design development, which can sometimes be omitted to a certain extent in initial research development sometimes. Another benefit is responding to need, I think, as we mentioned as well. So in terms of developing that reciprocal working relationship, it's less of an academic swooping in with an idea, and it's reciprocally sort of developed. And so it can help to make sure that need is responded to with the organisation that you're working with and the people who are accessing their services. The development of trust as well, it was sort of mentioned as both a benefit and a challenge. But certainly in our examples, it has helped facilitate future opportunities, that development of good, trusting working relationships, and knowing who to turn to when people may have sort of a desire to explore something else. Facilitating access, so through that development of a good trusting relationship, it can help facilitate access not only to participants but also to future research opportunities, and it can span through local networks as well, so it can spread, as I think Lauren's example demonstrated really nicely. Ethics process is a huge benefit. So anyone will know who's had to complete the ethics process, it can be quite an intensive process. So if actually you have co-produced a research design from the outset, you're actually really well placed to submit an ethical approval, which is more likely to be approved because you've considered what exactly it is that you're going to be doing, what that looks like, and maybe some of the challenges associated with that. So it can actually help speed up that ethical approval process. And I've mentioned future opportunities sort of threaded through each of those different benefits. So I think it's important to remember that although certain work can start off quite small and it might be framed as a consultancy opportunity, actually in terms of how you can then bring to the table your research skills in that relationship is often very warmly welcomed once you've got that trusting relationship developed. Okay, and in terms of challenges?
This must look really strange from home while we're dipping in and out of the screen, but it's the only way for us to do it. So we have come up with some challenges which I think are largely reflective of what's already been discussed. However, when we sat and wrote this list of challenges, we actually sort of came up with some caveats to them. So we don't want to minimise the challenges because they are present, but actually you can often sort of reframe them as a strength. So, for example, the research might take a different direction to what you initially anticipated, but if we think about the feedback that was given in the room earlier on, it can mean that your research is more useful, it's more operational, and therefore can contribute to a greater impact. So I think that's about keeping an open mind and not going in with too much of a fixed agenda. When you are approaching stakeholders, you might have a general idea, but keep it open because actually what their feedback might be something slightly different. We do have some challenges around maintaining autonomy, which again was picked up on the YouTube chat, and sort of maintaining that research integrity. But as was said in the comments, that can go both ways. It can make things easier, engaging and having that relationship with stakeholders, or it can make it more tricky. But it links back to that fundamental concept of being really transparent with the people that you're working with and managing those expectations. And linked into that, there may be some unexpected findings and recommendations. There may be some findings that criticise the stakeholders, criticise the organisation that you are doing the research on behalf of. But again, it's about having those transparent, upfront conversations from the beginning. And if you have uncovered something that's critical, basing it in the evidence, so making sure that you can back it up. And if you can, offer a solution to that. So you might say, okay, we found this and we feel this could be improved. So you're taking that strength-based and solution-focused approach. Costing projects can be tricky, which was picked up on in the room as well. I would say, I think from both of our perspectives, utilise the support that the college can offer. Steve Corbett is in the room. Is Abby online as well? Yes. So utilise support from Steve and Abby. They might not like us for saying this, but we've really appreciated that along the way. Talk to the college research team. They are there to support you in that costing of that project. You don't have to do it on your own and shouldn't really do it on your own either, because if you pluck a number out the air, you're likely to have to revise it. So utilise the support around you. Similarly, with writing proposals, so Abby has put together a really extensive toolkit. It's actually under the consultancy toolkit, but it's something that certainly I've used in developing proposals, and it's just made me think about everything that I need to include. So we've put some links later on in the slides to that toolkit that people can access as well. We talked about time, so it can take more time initially at the outset when you're trying to engage with stakeholders, but I do think overall it does save time sort of later down the line. But you do need to allow for that time. You need to allow for differences in timescales, differences in expectations, and what something that you might think might take 2 weeks might take an organisation 3 months, or vice versa. So it can go both ways as well. So you do need to have to be upfront and transparent about expected timescales and have those discussions as well. And then the last one that we picked up was about being rebuffed. So you might go to a stakeholder and say, got this idea, would you like to work with us on it? And they say, no, absolutely not. I don't think anybody that we've worked with has been quite that.
Not that explicit.
Yeah, it tends to happen in prisons sometimes.
Yeah.
But actually, it's better that you have those conversations up front and you maybe get a no, but it might turn into a more productive conversation thereafter, because that person can then say the reasons why they don't think it's suitable, and you can potentially work to address those reasons and to build something that's more suitable instead.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, I think in terms of being aware of your own skill set, sometimes you could then broaden out the discussion after that initial no to say, well, you know, just so you know, these are the sort of other areas that I research. If you're ever interested in starting a conversation about this more broadly, then please do get in touch so you can leave the door open. And also, as we mentioned, in tying that back into ethics, if you're rebuffed at the start, you haven't completed a research design proposal ethical application process without actually realising, oh, I'm not actually going to be able to engage with these participants or stakeholders because they're not interested. So it can save time ultimately, even though it sounds challenging, in the first instance.
So hopefully that helps just to sort of consider some of those challenges in a different way. We have put some sort of tips, I suppose, around effective ways of working. These aren't exhaustive, they're just a few of our initial thoughts really. And I think we've probably talked about quite a lot of them as we're going through, but just to run through. So you may well be developing relationships with stakeholders without expectations. So like we both did when we had those initial conversations with the respective organisations we used in our example, we kind of said, you know, just let us know if there's anything we can do to help. But we didn't necessarily have a specific expectation around that. There's been other examples. So recently I met somebody from Bernardo's who I'd worked with in a previous role, and I kind of was telling him about the different things that the university can do, the different schools within the university, the different areas of expertise, and I just left it open with him and said, you know, if ever you have a needs analysis or an evaluation that needs doing, then please get in contact. So there may well be something that comes from that. But it's about taking those opportunities to have those conversations without expectation when you can. Similarly, maximising small opportunities, that all links into the same area. Reach out on social media. So we both have social media accounts. Twitter is a big one for it, to be honest, because people will put things out on Twitter. Another project that I worked on was with Amanda and Tom and George, who we worked with on Project Compass, was an evaluation of Nottinghamshire with sleeper services, and that was something that was put out on Twitter, and we connected with them and engaged that way. That was the start of our working relationship. It's worth making sure that your staff profile is up to date, just in case people are browsing, and trying to find somebody with the relevant expertise, just in case those stakeholders are looking from the outside in, and trying to find suitable people. Keeping an open mind, we've talked about already, and transparency in managing expectations, and that can be around basically every element of the research. So you need to manage expectations around costs, around timescales, around what you can do, around what you can't do, around what suitable methodology is. But it's far easier to have those conversations up front from the outset and during the process than having them later down the line. Timescales we talked about, and just knowing our skills. So there have been times when somebody has come to me and said, can you help with this? And I said, I can't, I'm not quite the right person for it, but I do know somebody who can. Or if I don't know somebody who can, I'll try and find somebody who can through contacts across the university. So it's about knowing what skills we've got individually, trying to sort of have some awareness of what skills there are available across the university, and if not, knowing who you can go to. So for example, you could contact the college research team who would have knowledge around this, contact Steve who would have knowledge around this, Abby would have knowledge around that as well. So there are people that you can reach out to support that as well. So Lauren's just going to talk about some practical tips.
Yeah, and even just off the back of that last point, I very recently have been in a conversation with a local organisation who are more animal focused, so it's certainly not my area of expertise, but I've reached out and to Abby, who's helped direct me to a more appropriate staff member at the university, and will facilitate those conversations between those between that organisation and colleagues. So yeah, certainly knowing who you can sort of direct opportunities towards if it's not suitable for you is a really good tool to have. So we've got a few different practical tips on the slide. We've got a couple of links to the toolkits. So Lauren mentioned the consultancy toolkit earlier on, and we've also got the proposal template. So these are really useful to have an awareness of, maybe even before you engage and reach out to stakeholders. It can help sort of frame your thinking and make you feel more confident in engaging in that initial conversation, because you know exactly sort of what the process could look like, even if you're not sure what the specific research idea might be. There are lots of people within the team who can also help you. So the college research team and the research and enterprise team are really useful and helpful contacts. Particularly if you're not sure, you may have started a conversation with a stakeholder and you're both starting to think, okay, this is a really good research idea, we'd really like to work towards this. What sort of funding is there available? It's not always the case that the stakeholder will be able to provide funding themselves, so you may have to look together to find a pot of money which you could both sort of bid for and secure. So yeah, the research and enterprise team can be really helpful in identifying appropriate pots of money for you to work collaboratively on a project. Steve, of course, Research and Impact and Knowledge Exchange Manager, and Abby, of course, who is the consultancy lead in CoSS. And I'm always really keen to emphasise the opportunities that consultancy can bring in terms of research. So it's worth sort of considering engaging in consultancy opportunities for that relational development and thinking big, I suppose, as well. Colleagues, so knowing who you can sort of pass work onto or collaborate with can be a really helpful approach to sort of beginning these conversations. It can help you feel a little bit more confident if you've got someone that you could maybe have those initial conversations with and take along with you. And it's always good to collaborate as well. So it can help sort of spread the experience, I suppose. So if you have conducted evaluations or you do have a good working relationship and you can sort of share that opportunity with someone, I think that's always a collegiate thing to do. And also in terms of joining appropriate research networks, if you're feeling a little bit like I wouldn't know where to start, research networks can sort of facilitate conversations and sort of direct you towards organisations which, you know, locally or otherwise you could maybe collaborate with. I think they're the key practical tips on that slide. So in terms of final thoughts, we were just wondering if there's anything that we may have missed that anyone would like to add in terms of starting that stakeholder relationship and engaging people early, because we appreciate that we're not the only people who do this, so any further tips that anyone's happy to share would be fantastic. And we were wondering as well if this has sparked any ideas for potential next steps for people, whether or not people have now got a clearer idea about how they might engage stakeholders early and what this might look like for you. So please do share if you're happy to, either in the chat or on the link.
And I guess it might be a good time to take questions as well.
Yeah,
so if anybody's got any questions, then feel free to add those into the discussion as well. So any questions or thoughts?
Can I ask you a question? One of the things sometimes academics have is making that first step, that first contact. And I knew you said, Lauren, you listened to the radio, and then you said, I don't want to go back there too much. So what did that email say? How did you start the conversation? Was it just going to be a conversation? You didn't want to, you know?
Yeah, so the first email that I sent to Peter at Character Combat following hearing him on the radio, it was very much sort of exploring what he'd been sharing on the radio and sort of being really supportive and enthusiastic about some of the messages that he'd shared. And I did also include a short description of what it is I do and sort of explained my interest in the talk that he'd given and what he was doing. So I left it really open and sort of informal, and just said if you're ever happy to have a chat, maybe over Teams, given the pandemic at that time, it'd be great to hear more about what you do. So I really left it open to sort of keep that communication going, and yeah, it was really fortunate that my email didn't just go into his junk and he replied. And
Yeah, I think the key thing is keeping that initial contact email, if it's an email that you're using, keeping it fairly short but giving a small overview of your expertise and why you feel you might be right to work with them, and also why you want to work with them. So if there's some passion behind what you want to do, say that.
Yeah.
You know, Lauren and I both work on a project that's looking at the wellbeing of prison governors, and we knew we wanted to do something to support wellbeing of prison staff. And so I sent an email to one of the National Executive Committee of the Prison Governors Association that did exactly that, just outlined who we were, what we were doing, why we were contacting him, and just literally left it open and said, is there anything we can do to support? Are there any projects that we can get involved in? And he very quickly replied and said, ring me. So then the next stage was to follow up on that quite quickly and not to sort of leave him hanging. Long and short of it is about an hour and a half conversation later, we have a project that we're now working on. So it's just being brave, I think, and taking those steps, but explaining what you can offer. Any other questions or comments coming through?
Not online.
Not at the minute. Anything else in the room? I guess we can wrap it up then. Yeah. So thank you to everybody that's joined us. Thank you to everyone that's joined online and for contributions in the room as well. We have got our contact details on these slides. Have we got a list of people that have attended so we can send the slides out?
Please pop the slides in the Teams.
Oh, that's
things
fine.
everyone can get.
Yeah, so if anybody has got any further questions or wants to have any further discussions, we're both happy to help along the way, so feel free to get in contact. But thank you very much for everyone's time and thanks for listening.
Thank you.